How's it going, sports fans? This is Sam with SamShady Sports once again. I'm bringing you my first CFL related video in light of my recent, um, I guess you could say, job acquisition with CFLNewsHub.com as a writer. Um, Due to this development, I decided to start producing more CFL related videos to correspond with my articles. This is kind of an effort to produce a more digestible version of my articles for those who prefer to watch their news instead of read it. Um, Basically, I'm going to be linking these videos to the articles moving forward to help everybody find the content they would prefer in the future. Um, But today, the video that I'm coming at you with is actually USFL and CFL related. I've been covering the the USFL coaches, breaking them down one after another. And throughout my notes, I noticed a certain theme that has been going on repeatedly with these coaches. A lot of them have coached in other leagues that you wouldn't necessarily consider at the level of the NFL, such as the CFL, UFL, AAF, XFL, Spring League. Basically, they've got a coach that's coaching every spring or professional league not named the NFL that you've ever heard of, including the World League of American Football, which we'll get to here shortly. Um, but with that being said, three of the eight coaches that were hired by the USFL actually have previous knowledge and experience with the CFL, including Mike Reilly, who spent several seasons in the CFL as a coach, first as a defensive backs coach and later as a head coach. Um, so let's go ahead and dive into it. And let's start with Mike Reilly. As I mentioned before, he started as the defensive backs coach on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He coached there from 1983 to 1985. He moved on for one season, accepting a defensive coordinator position with Northern Colorado, a college program that is a lesser known program, but once again, it was a promotion for him. He was able to take on his first coordinator position at that point in his career. He went on to move on back to Winnipeg for the 87 season as the head coach. He spent from 87 to 1990 with the Blue Bombers as their head coach, compiling a 40-32 record in the regular season, a 6-2 record in the playoffs, and 2 wins in a Grey Cups. So not a bad 4 year stint at any stretch of the imagination. Um, I'm not quite sure what the circumstances were, if he decided to leave on his own accord or if Winnipeg was looking in a different direction and let his contract expire. However, the next season in 1991, he joined the World League of American Football. This is actually somewhat significant to this story because he coached the San Antonio Riders, who for the 91 and 92 season existed solely in the World League of American or of Football. But for their third season in 1993, they attempted to move to the CFL before funding ran out and they ultimately ended up having to fold. I thought that was quite odd that he happened to almost have a second run in the CFL with a totally different team from a totally different league. Um, that's got to be some of the most unique experience of this entire list when it comes to the coaching staff, and it's going to benefit him in the long run, I believe, even if he doesn't have existing connections in the CFL. Having that professional coaching experience in his background, where he was very successful, uh, will definitely benefit him in the future with the USFL. The next man on our list, Bart Andrus, was far less successful in the Canadian Football League. Um, Despite having no previous experience at the CFL level, he was hired as the head coach of the Toronto Argonauts in 2009. Uh, he compiled a 3-15 record in his first season and was ultimately fired after that one season. After that, he went on to join the United Football League as an offensive coordinator before taking over as head coach there. He went 2-2 in the UFL, showing that he has some ability to coach at the professional level before the league folded in 2012. Um, he, like I said, had a very brief run in the CFL. But once again, you see this demonstrated that the USFL is looking for these coaches that have experience in the developmental leagues and the spring football leagues to try and woo that player base to them. If these players are familiar with these coaches and familiar with their background and their schemes, they're more likely to join the USFL in hopes of joining one of these coaches that they're aware of, or one of these coaches that they know the name of from coaching in the CFL and the NFL, which are the highest two rungs of football that you could possibly coach at this point. Our next and third guy is actually has experience in the CFL as a player, but never actually coached in the CFL. And he would coach in the college level before moving on to be an NFL coach for over 20 years, and only recently left the NFL, actually. That man is Kirby Wilson. He began his career as a defensive back slash kick returner with Winnipeg, once again, in 1983. In 1984, he joined Toronto before beginning to coach in 1985. He spent 3 seasons bouncing around the community college level before he later jumped into the college level. And then later in 1997, I believe it was, he jumped into the NFL level and remained for over 20 years. His last season as a running backs coach was in 2020 with the Raiders under John Gruden. So, like I said, only a season ago, he's only been out of the NFL for 1 year, and now he finds himself in his first head coaching opportunity. I think this is a huge, huge win for him because he was never garnering the respect that he truly deserved at the NFL level as a potential head coaching candidate. Now he joins a league where he's not only the head coach, he's the general manager. So he knows how he wants to run his scheme. He knows what kind of players he needs for his scheme, and he's able to go out and get them to hopefully make himself successful in his first season as a head coach at any level. He never even was a head coach at a college level. He was always a position coach or a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator, which is ironic that he wound up a very popular running backs coach but started his career as a defensive back. It's always odd how that works. But moving on, it seems fairly obvious, as I pointed out earlier, that the USFL is targeting coaches with prior experience in the spring leagues or the CFL. Once again, they're wanting these coaches because you're going to garner a higher level of talent because you have a high level of coaching. And when you utilize all these big names in the coaching world to draw players and fans to the league, it does two things for you. One, it turns heads and it turns players' attentions to your league, despite the fact that it's a short-term league in which you only play 10 games and it roughly the whole season lasts about 6 months, which is important because their pay structure is quite a bit lower than the CFL, and it's nowhere near the NFL, obviously. So for them to compete for players with the low end of the NFL as well as the mid-tier to low end of the CFL players, they're going to need to provide a high level of coaching and a proof that these players can potentially progress to a higher level of football, whether it be the NFL or back to a higher position in the CFL. That's the only real way they're going to be able to draw these players. And one of the ways they were able to do that was by bringing in these coaches that these players know, they've heard of, they've seen on, Sundays or Saturdays or whatever. They've seen as players in um, Kirby's case. There's bound to be players that they have familiarity with from previous stops in the player selection pool that includes 3,000 players. And we're only about a week away before they select these players. So these guys having prior knowledge of any of these guys, even if it's a small group, is going to benefit them as a coach and a general manager that's about to have to handle their first draft as such. With the pay structure being so much less than the CFL and the NFL, these coaches having previous experience with this player pool is going to be extremely important because they need to be able to find those diamonds in the rough, those guys that they may have seen flash in camp or on film when they were scouting them as an XFL coach or as a CFL coach or a spring league coach or whatever it may be. in order to find those guys that are going to build the core of their team that other teams and leagues may not have seen because they didn't have that up close and personal look at that player. That's where I believe the previous experience in these developmental leagues will be key, because in those developmental leagues, you're kind of coach slash recruiting coordinator almost, especially if you're a head coach, because you're looking to draw the best possible talent to your team. And at that point, you're a developmental league. So those guys are looking at what's their best chance to leap to the next level. So they're looking for the best coaches, the most playing time, and the coaches that have a track record of developing high caliber talent. So it's important that they were able to go get all these guys. Well, granted, with the player selection meeting, they're not going to be so much recruiting coordinators this year, but none of these guys have previous scouting experience. All of their experience lies in coaching, except for Todd Haley, who had, I think, 3 years as a scout and was the son of Dick Haley. Because of this, they really need to utilize their previous experience with these players. They're not going to be able to attract household names, as we saw with Todd Haley trying to woo Antonio Bryant. He basically laughed him off. The reality is, the most of these names will be making these rounds on these developmental circuits already. There'll be guys that you've probably seen before on these levels. They may have played for the XFL, the USFL. It's just a new addition to this round of football that they're able to play. I think we'll see many recognizable names, maybe even some former NFL stars, whether it be guys from the Fan Control Football League currently, like Josh Gordon and Johnny Manziel, or we see former NFL guys like maybe AJ Jenkins and John Baldwin decide to hop back out of retirement and try and play some professional ball again. It will be interesting to see exactly who ends up popping out of this 3,000 player pool. I mean, that's a lot of players to select, and I know these guys are drafting full teams, but there's only 8 teams. So there's going to be a significant free agent pool afterward for these coaches to delve into and try and find even more players to round out their roster after the draft should injuries occur, which is one more reason why these relationships are even more important. If you have a previous relationship with a guy, it's almost like you can keep him as a floater who may not be on your practice roster, quote unquote, but he can be there should an injury occur, and you can bring him back onto the roster pretty quickly because he's got that familiarity with you. Um, Players are going to follow coaches they know, especially in football at this level. It's very important for them to continue their development. So if they're able to stay in the same scheme with the same coach, it's going to show year after year that there was progress in their development. Similar to how coaches follow each other to new teams to receive promotions, it's basically a player's way of trying to follow their coach to a new team in order to receive their version of a promotion to a new league. Now, I've already touched on the fact that these players are looking for these coaches in the higher level of coaching because they want to leap to a next level. But I also mentioned the fact that the core of these teams are going to be built with guys you've probably never heard of at an NFL level or maybe even a CFL level. These are going to be lower level football players trying to find their way in the world. But that's why the high level of coaching is important. You're able to draw these guys that will stay in the league and continue to develop, but continue to be USFL players rather than moving on to the next level because they're not quite that good. Which, believe it or not, those are the guys that are going to draw fan attention more, because then you'll have names that start to pop out year after year after year because they're staying in the league and they're performing. Kind of like the guys that you see in the CFL right now with like Jeremiah Masoli, Zach Caleros, and William Powell's, where they may have had a brief stint in the NFL or another league previously in their career, but they've been in the CFL for so long that when you think of the Canadian Football League, you think of Masoli, you think of Caleros, you think of Powell, you think of some other guys that are around as well. But it's not the guys that are popping in and out of the league, constantly trying to attempt to jump into the NFL that really draw your attention. It's these guys like I said, the constant all-stars at that level that are drawing your attention. It was the same way with the Arena Football League. It was the same way with the UFL, the AAF, XFL. People always want to point to the big names that jump to the NFL level, but it's those guys that remain in those leagues that draw fan attention year after year after year, year after year. It's the same way in the NFL if you really think about it. If you're a fan of a team and they bring in a player on a 1 year contract, are you a bigger fan of that 1 year contract player or a player that's been on your team for 7, 8 years that has continued to develop, continued to fight, continued to be on your team and try to win games for your team? Of course, you're going to be a bigger fan of that one guy that's been there for years rather than the guy who's just going to pop in as almost like a mercenary that is going to make his money, do the best he can, and then move on to the next team that's going to pay him more money. Um, that's what these leagues are about. Player retention is going to be so key at this level, it's not even funny. When you get to the 2022 season, obviously you're going to want some name recognition, but you need to be also looking for guys that are going to stay at this level. So you continue to have that name recognition rather than guys that are going to immediately look for other opportunities down the road. I've touched on it in the past, but I think that USFL is making a slight bit of a mistake in their non-compete contract clauses. I think they may relook at it down in the future, but they should potentially open up a loophole to where players can sign with other leagues such as the XFL that are not directly competing with them as far as time slots. As far like seasonal time slots, like February to March to April, etc. With that being the case, these players will be able to earn more money and they'd be more likely to sign with the USFL because then they can jump between the USFL and the XFL and they can earn around 90 to 100,000 a year rather than the 45 grand the USFL is going to pay them for a single season, roughly. However, the biggest question plaguing the USFL in 2023 and beyond is going to be player retention. Step one was acquiring the coaches that the players may have previous relationships with in order to give them more incentive to join and stay in the USFL. But step two is the incentive package, which we now know includes several perks not seen in previous leagues. These perks include the offering to pay for college tuition and year-round medical coverage. Now, granted, I understand that they would probably want to provide a loophole in that specific perk if a player was to join another league, like further down the line when they're not in the USFL season. But I still think it's something they should consider long term, although it's something that they have said they won't consider currently. Step three, I believe, is providing a stable league, which in turn will provide more incentive for players to come to them. If you last through year one, you're going to get better players. You might even get some college players right out of the senior season that are looking to provide more of a case for them to jump to the NFL or whatever, and you will get them for a couple, 3 seasons or 2, 3 seasons when they're developing in the USFL level. This is going to be super important going down the line. Granted, the USFL has come out and said in the past that they have funding for 3 seasons due to their partnership with major broadcast networks that are going to already broadcast their games, but it remains to be seen. We've heard these things in the past about the AAF, the UFL, and stuff like that, and it just seems like if you don't get over that immediate hump of the first season with fan retention and player retention in mind, you're not going to last. And I really hope the USFL does last. I hope the XFL hits next season and is a huge success as well. But with all these leagues competing for players, it's thinning out the player pool, which it might affect the overall product of on the field when it comes to the XFL versus the USFL, CFL, and NFL. But it remains to be seen how that works out in the future. Well, anyways, that's all I've got for you today. Once again, check out my content on CFLnewshub.com. They were gracious enough to bring me on as a writer, and I am thoroughly enjoying learning more and more about the CFL as I research and dive into the history of it, the players that are in it now. It's been a lot of fun to learn. I didn't have a whole lot of previous knowledge about the CFL. I've followed it kind of as a fan, just watching the games, but never really followed it like I followed the NFL, as you can tell behind me. But past few weeks, I've learned a lot more about it, and it almost seems like it might be a more exciting game than the NFL. But we'll see. That remains to be seen. Um, Also, I want to um, reiterate, I'm sorry, my partnership with Seat Geek. You can use my code SamShady to get a $20 discount on any purchase, um, whether it's concert tickets, seats for stadium events, including sports, whatever it may be. Save yourself some money, help promote this channel, and I would appreciate any support you can give me. But anyway, thank you for watching. As always, please drop a comment, like, and subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed it. Um, I'm fairly new to this, so whatever help I can get in promoting this channel is much appreciated, and I hope you stay tuned in the future. Once again, thank you for dropping in and watching this video.